Okay, I think we're live. So, hello, Richard, and hello, everyone. So, welcome to our No Can Will Do live stream. Really excited to join you this Friday evening. We're talking about all things action learning, which is a topic of obviously real passion for us. The idea today is to unpack it and what is action learning and why is it a method for today more than ever. In the uncertain times we're in, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, good to join you. We always have a good chat at the end of the week, don't we?
Yeah.
And it's a time for sort of reflecting on the week that we've had, and then sort of having a bit of a rest maybe, and then looking ahead. And so it's been an exciting kind of week, and I've had lots of good discussions with people that have kind of provoked me into thinking about why is action learning relevant for now and the future, even though it's a method that kind of, as we know, it goes back quite a long way, in fact, to the mid-20th century, really, with Reg Revans as a scientist who kind of created the concept based on his experience working with high achieving scientists in the laboratories where they were facing really sort of challenging situations.
Yeah.
And we're in that situation now where we're facing massive challenges, societally, globally, ethically, etc. And I think it's a good time for action learning as a method to help us actually face into the unknown, really.
Yeah, definitely. And my experience, we'll get into sort of what it is in a moment, but my experience is it's just very good at working in the moment. Whatever's happening, it works with whatever's going on at that moment. And it doesn't demand, as a method, it just doesn't demand certainty or perfection. It's kind of all about working with what's happening in the here and now.
I think that's right. And sometimes when people join the action learning programs that I'm involved in facilitating myself, they often kind of feel they want to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And it's almost as though they're looking for the answer or the script. And it's definitely not like that. It is about working with the reality, so if they're trying to work out what their action learning question is, I was talking to a group this morning where that was their sort of stage that they're at, within government organization, basically. And they're trying to work out, what challenge do I work on? What's my question going to be? And rather than sort of saying, well, I'll pick something from a list that somebody else gives me, my question back to them is to say, what's the real challenge that you've got? What's hurting at the moment? Or what are you facing into where there's not a book that you can go to, or a script, or some pre-existing knowledge, or a process, or an expert? It's kind of more messy than that. And that should be the basis for your inquiry or your question, whether you're working on your individual question in a learning set, or whether you're, as a set, working on a common challenge, an organizational or a team challenge.
Yeah. I think that's it. It's kind of working in the moment, working with multifaceted problems, which frankly we all have in today's world. Perhaps for the listeners who are new to action learning, could you just give me a bit of the background of, like, where's it come from? What is action learning, and why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. So so action learning, it kind of became known as an expression or a phrase relating to a particular methodology, which is one of the very few proven theories related to management, actually, that of action learning, developed originally, as I say, by Reg Revans. And he was an interesting guy. I mean, one started off as a scientist at a pretty high level, and then went into what we would now call organization development, or change, or culture change, and those sorts of things. But he was very driven by the idea of having to fix real world, or trying to get people fixing and working on collaboratively real world problems or challenges. So, for him, he was brought into the coal industry to try and pick it up post-World War II. He went to Belgium and linked the universities with industry in order to try and improve the economy, and it did improve the economy. He went to the London hospitals to actually focus on a project to improve the rate and speed of healing of patients and the efficiency of hospitals. So these were real world problems and challenges back then. But the theory, if you like, behind it is summed up by his equation, which is very simple. Basically says that learning is a combination, or L equals P, which is programmed knowledge. So that's knowledge that's already existing. It's in those books behind me. And, it's kind of literature. It might be gurus, or what we call gurus, or experts, consultants, people who maybe have codified pre-existing knowledge. So that's one part of learning, but it's a limited part of learning when we're facing real world challenges. And the other part is Q. So L equals P plus Q, and Q is questions. So a big focus in action learning is leading with questions. It's working out what are the questions we should be tackling, rather than filling our heads with lots of P program knowledge in order to solve future and real world problems. That's what it is. It's as simple as that. And I would go as far as to say that where we are now, we're getting very seduced by the whole idea of AI is going to be solving all of our problems for the future. What is AI? You and I, Shell, were at the London Learning Technologies show recently.
Yeah.
And how much, I'm asking you now, how much of those displays and shows and people that were kind of there showing their wares, how much of it was to do with P, the programmed knowledge, or Q, the questions?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? The way I kind of have described it to other people who weren't there is it was like seeing a library of content, like a meta library of content. And, as a learning architect, I'd say, well, content's just one part of the equation. In fact, it's the smallest part of the equation. My belief is that the learning happens when you go beyond the script and you get something fails, the system fails, or you're asked to kind of apply some logic to a problem. And so I was quite disappointed to see that that's the application of AI.
It was 90% plus that was knowledge related, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And clearly there was kind of, a lot of interesting, efficient and clever platforms that were repackaging and hoovering up and sort of presenting and giving access to knowledge. I read an interesting article this week, which was written by an academic about the challenges facing universities.
Okay.
And what they were saying in this paper was that we're now in a world of automated knowledge production. In other words, read AI. And it was questioning really, what is the role of the university?
Yeah.
And, is it about, knowledge production and teaching knowledge? Or is it about something more than that? And I believe it's about something more than that. It is about people being curious about questions that are future focused. Yes, drawing on the bodies of knowledge as if they're relevant, drawing them in order to tackle real world problems or challenges, as you say, multifaceted problems. For me, that means they may have a human aspect to them. They may have a financial facet to them. There might be a social or a project or a business or a strategic aspect to them. That's what we mean by multifaceted.
I agree more. So if I were to try and describe what I think AI can't do yet, is embed in a human being the ability to ask the right questions and to inquire and to be curious. So I think, we talk a lot about, human technical or socio-technical systems. I think many organizations, some in government and elsewhere, haven't yet made the most of the opportunities that AI gives us to sort of shortcut the process of acquiring knowledge.
Sure.
But AI, I don't think I mean, let's see where AI goes for the next sort of decade. There's a whole research area around agentic AI and the ability of AI to acquire actually human-centric attributes like emotional intelligence, for example. I myself think that's a frontier that there will always be a human in the loop.
Yeah.
The ability to judge a relational environment and to kind of apply knowledge to that in a way that's tacit and
Yes.
and nuanced. I think that is where the human is in
Yeah.
this new reality.
I think that's a great point. And for me, this is about where do we add some value in what we're able to do through our interventions and our programs. And for me, it's this belief in the human element of the process of learning, and humanistic organization development, or people-centric work that we do. It's that systemic ability to do the systemic thinking in terms of not just the organizational system, the project systems, but the human systems and what's going on, what's at play. That's where I think so many people are kind of flocking to the program knowledge and the looking for the platform that's a bit smarter than the next platform, and you can see them all competing with each other at that show the other day. But actually, who's focusing on the questions?
Totally. And I think with AI, like a lot of in the technical space, I work with a lot of organizations that are very much about AI, what they call AI on the edge. So right on the edge of a frontier, and how we can apply AI to just get better outcomes. Technology.
And fast as well. You can do things fast.
I think my sense is with our products, with things like the strategic orbits exercise, we're about the humans on the edge. Like, how do you make the most of a human being's ability to read, yes, the program knowledge they've got, but also the relational environment, so that they can actually apply human logic to a socio-technical system. That's the exciting stuff.
Sure.
I was going to ask you, why do you think, based on your 20 plus years of experience of action learning, why do you think it's a method that thrives in uncertainty and chaos?
Well, it's, it was always set up to deal with real challenges. So those challenges ranged from, the corporate organization is facing a kind of competitive crisis. It may be taken over or acquired, or it may be a productivity or a profit, finance related crisis, or it could be a kind of, a human challenge. So, it's always been about that. It's always been about working with real world challenges. I just think right now we're facing into so many things that, we've been through COVID. If you look at what happened with the COVID crisis, and I was sat here trying to sort of work my way through, how do we get through this? One, kind of stay safe, keep the family safe, and, keep the business going. And was trying to sort of observe what was going on. And, what I noticed initially was, obviously there was a huge amount of frustration with people not knowing when the problem was going to end, or the pandemic was going to end, when we were going to find a vaccine. There was huge pressure going on, from the public to the politicians, and the press were putting their sort of pressure on as well. And then there was pressure between different countries. And it was kind of, it was almost as though people know that there's an answer somewhere, but we just got to find it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that, really. It was a multifaceted challenge, wasn't it?
It was.
And the breakthrough for me, I think, was when people started to say, senior leaders, whether they were in business, the medical sector, politics, actually said, I don't know when it's going to end. We don't know. They started to admit they didn't know. And then they started to collaborate and saying, well, we need to talk to this country and what they're finding out. and sort of look at the, the research data that's coming out from there that can inform our thinking. This was action learning. It was collaborating, because that's the other thing I didn't say earlier on, that action learning is always about social learning. It's learning with and from other people. Often in cultures we work in, it's more about individualism, isn't it, rather than collectivism. Action learning is collaborative. And so, you look at how we did come out of COVID. I think there was quite a sort of significant change when people started to admit that we just actually don't know. And things collaborate. You were involved in some of the aspects of the work that was happening. How did you experience that from that side, Shell?
Yeah, I mean, I knew nothing about action learning at this point, and I find this really interesting because it was, I was doing quite a lot of my own research at that time around human behaviour and how decision making works, ironically, beyond the system failing. And that's what kind of where I was operating. I was working with a number of different agencies looking at the pandemic response from a national perspective, and all of that. Like, I remember going into London, and this, but I turned up in London with one bag thinking I'd be there for 8 hours, and I came back sort of 8 weeks later, having been locked down through the absolute kind of crux of the pandemic period. And at that point, no one knew anything about it. I remember having a briefing at that time with some quite senior officials, and it really was, in sort of Revan's terminology, we were trading our ignorance. I remember, being really inspired by a leader who just said, look, we don't know what this pandemic actually is. It's already in, it's kind of in the UK. It's going to have a huge impact on society and on the world, and we're going to need to just work with it, essentially. So my entrance into the COVID challenge was trading ignorance, right? So that was my experience, and I think you're right. My experience of being in it was the moment we realized there were new frontiers of knowledge, as in the algorithm, scientific discovery, research hadn't equipped us with the skills or the kind of knowledge to actually get through it. That was the point at which really adaptive decision making started to happen.
I'm really interested in that experience where you described the leader who clearly was a very strong leader for that kind of situation, who was willing to say, I don't know. And that takes something, doesn't it? It's not necessarily how leaders have traditionally been conditioned, or how they're expected to, and how they themselves feel the pressure to actually perform, which is about demonstrating that they do know. I'm interested in that person. You don't have to say who it was, but what were the what were the kind of special qualities that person had?
So that person, I think, so there was the qualities that they showed that day, and then there was the impact that it had on me and others in the room. So the qualities were, this person was, a very seasoned leader. They got a lot of status from managing crises, all sorts of crises, and actually probably had become quite comfortable operating in the unknown. So there's someone who, had got decades of experience operating beyond the rule book, like where, the rules had failed, the system had failed, the kind of mitigations had failed, and it got very comfortable operating on the edge of that. And so as a result, I can take some kind of inspiration from that as a leader, that being authentic in that moment is really important, because this individual was talking to a room full of leaders, and they had the choice to either say, here's the rule book, or there is no rule book, go and lead. And I think the impact it had on me was it made me feel empowered, because it made it, first of all, there was the kind of initial shock of, right, okay, we're operating in a new space now. This is something I've never experienced before, where there's no algorithm, there's no kind of prescribed way to deal with this. which for me as a leader, it kicked in my mindset of being empowered to actually lead it the way I intuitively know, and to apply my skills and knowledge and approach. And that's exactly what I did. I did it my way. And I think what that individual did was gave from it was a very action learning mindset of kind of empowering each of us in that room to do it our way. And I kind of, when I think about action learning and my experience of action learning, that's probably the experience that makes me think of it most, because I felt very empowered by that.
Sure. So let's fast forward a little bit from that period, a year or two sort of later.
Yeah.
We met and, brought your experience from, crisis situations, military, etc., and mine from developing a particular action learning methodology over the last 25 years now, which has been used in different sectors. Just give us your kind of view of, how did that all land with you, this idea of the action learning question? Rather than me sort of give a lecture on what it is, I'm interested in hearing from you, how did it land, and, what is it to you now?
Yeah. So I think coming from that experience in COVID, I think I came off the back of that experience going, okay, then maybe there isn't just one prescribed way to deal with things. Like having my 20 years of military experience had taught me there's a kind of algorithm or an approach for most things. I think when we met, you very rapidly gave me a process that said it allowed you to not know. It allowed you to roll with not being the authority on a subject. And I think that's hugely empowering for people. I think the traditional approach to leadership, as and case method would say this, is it's a great leader with all the answers. And as we often say, the downward communication of certainty, not the upward communication of doubt. I'm a big believer in being comfortable with doubt, because in the world we're in now, there's doubt everywhere. There is no absolute. We're in a both and world in most things. And so I think that very quickly that with as little knowledge as I had of action learning, we applied it directly in a context, in quite an evolving context in science and technology, where large scale organizational and social change happening. And we were able to give a method to individuals, professionals, that gave them permission to roll with the not knowing. That's hugely powerful from my perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the case study method as well, because it is quite different to the case study method, which has been for many years the predominant method for teaching management. And attempts have been made to teach leadership, but you can't really teach leadership, but using the case method. And if you really look at how the case method has been applied, if you look at the sort of classic sort of approach to it, you're looking at old cases, so they're really dead cases there. And Henry Mintzberg has something to say about this in his book Managers Not MBAs. He goes through the sort of history of this, which is that these cases, they've happened in the past, they have been resolved in some way, and there is a kind of supposedly correct answer. And then what you do is you bring a group of, intelligent people together to expose them to bits of the case study, and they kind of have to do an intellectual exercise to show who's the quickest thinker, to be able to kind of puzzle solve in order to come up with what they would do, not what they did do or what they are doing or what they're going to do, but what they would have done or what they would do. And they express that, and then the professor kind of, awards them kind of, a pass accordingly.
I'm smiling because the vast majority of military education is based on the case method.
Is it? Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
What I'm reflecting on is, as a parallel process, is that actually when I met you, you kind of challenged everything I knew around leadership, professional leadership development. And brilliant that you did, because if someone were to really hold me to what was the one moment you learnt about leadership, it was when I didn't know what I was doing and I'd got it wrong.
Yes.
I remember a very distinct example where I was at Sandhurst. Thankfully, I was at Sandhurst. It wasn't real. It was high. It felt real, but it wasn't real. And I failed terribly with my plan. I was asked to do an ambush process, and I was really tired. We'd been on the ground for 2 weeks, and I was exhausted. And I wrote a terrible plan. I got the team lost, and it was a really tough night. That's my learning from Sandhurst, and never got that wrong again.
Yeah.
And the learning happened on the edge. It happened when I didn't know.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting.
And that's this hugely memorable moment for me. And yet 90% of my career training, I've had years of leadership training.
Yeah.
And it's been all about case method.
So I think, my challenge to people and organizations that I work with now is, what are the live case studies that are working? They're dynamic case studies. What's this is a living laboratory that we're working with collaboratively, coalescing around real world problems.
Yeah.
And to give a few examples, there are things like, we've had people, tackling questions like, how do we create new ways of working and new levels of engagement with people who are now disengaged? Great question. No one answer or book that you can go to on that. You need to work through it by experimentation in real time. How do we get people to take responsibility for environmental sustainability? Great question. We can talk about it sort of conceptually as something out there, but how do we actually do it within our organization? We had somebody do a great job working through a question such as that. How do we integrate AI? That would be a great question, really, with our existing systems. Diversity and inclusion. How do we actually work with getting diversity and inclusion to work in practice and move beyond the rules and the regulations? Because the rules and the regulations are codified. AI will spit that out for you very quickly.
Yeah.
But the real challenge is, how do we get this to work now, here and now, in practice, in organizations, for the benefit of people and organizations now and into the future?
That is so powerful, because when I think about there's so many great living examples there, like, ESG and sustainability, making it real. How do we make it real in service of society is such a powerful question. With the diversity one, obviously you and I have very real hidden diversity.
Yep.
We can get AI to write us a diversity impact statement, but you can't get AI to make diversity live and breathe in a classroom, in a learning environment, in society, in a way that breaks down barriers. And I think that's being as disruptive as we are, I think that's a very big anchor for us, is pushing through those barriers and accrediting learning in its truest sense, which is in experience.
Yeah, so we should talk about that in a minute. I think this idea of how do we accredit learning that is done through action? It's action learning.
Well, let's talk about that, because we had a great conversation with some collaborators today about that, didn't we? Around, we were sharing our shared story, actually, around we've all got quite non-standard backgrounds, and valuing experience and real learning on the ground is, I think, where we should be today. Like, we're in a world where that's as uncertain and VUCA and challenging as it's ever been. We should be crediting people who've got the skills to navigate that, not necessarily the certifications. So I'm interested in
Yeah, sure. So it's something that's kind of close to my heart. I've spent sort of 25 years since we created the action learning question method, and it was accredited right from the start. So I had various experiences with linking up with various universities around the world, a few in the UK, one that we actually started up as a university for action learning in the US. Some work that I did in Australia, where an Australian management institute recognized the action learning question process. So, I've been kind of working on that in that world for a number of years. with various kind of levels of success and experience. My belief, if you like, and I guess my kind of why, my passion, is that people who are doing real work, solving real problems, using an action learning approach, in order to do so, have to use certain intellectual skills. So they have to kind of do all those things that would be listed by a university as meeting the criteria for whether it's a postgrad level qualification or a doctoral qualification, etc. Those people might not necessarily see themselves as working at postgrad level, but they are. They're having to do analysis, they're having to do synthesis, they're having to make sense, they're having to reflect, they're having to do all those good things. They're doing it without knowing the labels, actually.
Absolutely.
And my view has been that they deserve to be recognised for it. And thankfully, a number of universities over the years have accepted that argument and have been willing to be a little bit counter-cultural in terms of the traditional university and business school system. Actually say, we will recognise this. Where it all started, Shell, was interesting. We were asking the question, having been asked by a finance sector organisation, a bank in the UK, to set up a leadership programme for people who were leaders in the bank, who wanted them to have an accredited qualification, but they didn't want them to spend weeks and weeks at business school. So they didn't want to send them off for a traditional MBA. And we thought, how do we actually create a qualification which is quite different from this old model, if you like? And we said, what would Reg Revans do here? I remember the conversation with a colleague. What would he do? And my colleague who'd worked with Reg Revans said, well, he would say, don't go creating a whole load of manuals with lots of objectives and sort of predetermined knowledge to teach. Let's just do something around questions. So we based the whole thing around questions. And a number of universities over the years have accepted this. And the latest great partnership that we've got is in London with the University of York St John, the London campus, and with a very forward-thinking dean there, Louise Donaghy, who has helped us gain recognition for the action learning facilitator program. So we've created a program. I created it years ago, actually, but we've now kind of fed it into the accreditation at this particular university in London's Docklands. And it enables people to get accredited at postgraduate level in being an action learning facilitator. And for me, this is about a multiplier effect, that if we've got a lot of facilitators of action learning working in their different sectors, it might be in, community sectors, it might be in the third sector, it might be in business, might be in the government departments, etc. But if we've got a number of facilitators out there who are accredited and qualified, one, it's good for them that they're getting recognition for that, but also they're able to actually spread the approach into their client organizations.
Yeah, and it really resonates with me because I had a non-standard route to accreditation myself, joining the military quite young, came from a disadvantaged background. And, one of the things I'm proudest of is creating a level 7 pathway for those with non-standard backgrounds. And I just think this is so powerful because accrediting life experience, the University of Life, if you like, and like we say, working on the edge, like beyond algorithms, beyond program knowledge, with practice, with really, embedded practice and experience is hugely powerful. And we're really lucky with York St John that they understand this and have kind of hacked the system, the traditionalist hierarchical academic system that really only accredits those sort of, if you like, prior certifications. Actually, what's really exciting about this is we're accrediting knowledge and experience, and that's so powerful. well.
Well, and partly it's because we've brought together people who are, leading in our various ways, who are driven by a personal why.
Yeah.
What you've just described is your own why, your own personal drivers that, sparked your kind of interest in doing things differently.
Yeah.
And the leader in the university, her why is very much about wanting to constructively challenge, enable people to challenge institutions that they've been frozen out of in the past, so that
Yeah.
they become part of those institutions. That's a really powerful why, and I can buy into.
I can buy into that as well, breaking down the traditional institutional dominance that kind of drives perpetual advantage. And I feel like everyone in our network in No Can Will Do is united by that why.
Yes.
So I was thinking in the last few minutes, we should maybe talk for those listeners who are kind of less versed in action learning. I wonder if we can explore a bit about how they can start using action learning today and how it might apply to their contexts, and maybe some tools and processes that can support that.
Yeah, that's a good question. What could you do today now that is kind of action learning based? Well, I think the starting point that people might want to work with is, if you look at your inbox or your objectives, you could probably categorize what you have to do in two ways. Some of it will be puzzles, right? This is a puzzle I've been working on, right? There's a known answer when I get to the end of it. In fact, I can hack it by going to YouTube and finding out the different methods to solve it. So I know what it is from the start. I haven't got necessarily the fluent skills to do it, but I can find out how to do it, or I can get somebody to do it for me. And then we know when it's been done. That is a puzzle. Some of the things in your inbox are puzzles. There's a known way to do it. If you're the expert and you know how to do it, get on and do it. You don't need action learning to do that. You probably don't even need a training course to do it. But there's a known answer. That is different to a multifaceted problem that you were talking about earlier on. So when you look through your inbox, or when you look at your objectives, or when you look at what you're driven by and what you want to really achieve for your business or whatever it is, think about 2 or 3 questions or problems or challenges that you face and try and turn them into a question. This is the thing I was doing with a group on an action learning program this morning. They were trying to work out what their question would be. And they need to be questions where there is not a known place to go for the answer. Deliberately step in to the difficult aspects of the question. So this morning, one of the people was describing how she wasn't sure whether she should tackle a particular question because it would be a bit tricky and sensitive in what she sort of discloses to her manager. Well, to me, this was the question.
That makes it such a good question.
This is not the question to be avoided because it's a bit too difficult. This is the real question to grapple with.
Yeah.
Not one answer to go. And thankfully, we then went around the learning set and got other people to sort of comment on what she said. And they did nail it because they said, look, you're kind of just trying to move away from this, or should you be moving towards it? So deliberately go for those sorts of questions. And then you can start to think, who cares about this? Anybody else in the organization or in my team or my colleagues or my friends, who actually cares about it? I'm going to go and talk to them and see how they would frame it as a question. What's the question mean to them? Then you're up and running, okay? And then there are a number of stages that we go through, and we've got a structured approach of the action learning question. And there's lots of stuff on our website. There's a link to a lot of materials and articles and things that we've written over the years. But one of the methods which I know is sort of caught on well with participants on programs is, we call it knowledge mapping, which is, once you've worked out your question, how do you sort of work out your plan for researching it, both the theory or the sky, on the ground in terms of what's really happening, in front of you, which can give you data, and then what's going on underground, the hard bits really to sort of surface, that you can investigate. Do a bit of work on plotting that as a map, and then you can purposefully navigate the map in order to inquire into your question, to take some action, because that's the other key thing that with action learning, there has to be some action. There's no learning without action, no action without learning, as Revan said. So yeah, I think that's the first thing I would say. Shel, if you want to get started, look in your inbox or look at your objectives or look at what's driving you and what you get up in the morning for, and say, let's disentangle the puzzles from the problems. Not saying the puzzles are irrelevant, but often what we try and do is use a puzzle type method, maybe aspects of project management, for instance, in order to tackle a complex, multifaceted and humanistic problem.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And obviously I've been through the action learning facilitator process now. And I would say, as a business leader, what question have you not tackled? What conversation are you not having?
Yeah.
What seems too big a problem to surmount today? And that's probably your question. And as a mindset, it empowers individuals and organizations to just work with that problem and bring others in and learn together, learn with and from others, and not feel isolated in that space. I think in today's context, leadership can be quite isolating. All of our products work in the moment and bring people together to co-navigate problems. So if you've got a strategic problem, we've got we have a method called strategic orbits exercise where you can bring people together to start to surface the unseen challenges around your question. If you've got leaders in your organization who need to feel more empowered, let them approach their business change as a question that they take some ownership for. If you want to be more empowered as an organization to facilitate your own change, the action learning facilitator accreditation can give you those opportunities as well. So it's for me as a psychologist, it's just very empowering, and it takes problems into the, in a kind of, for those people who are interested in other problem solving methods like Kinefin and VUCA, it takes a complex problem into the solvable space where you can work on it in the moment. And I think psychologically that's very empowering for today's times, where you blink and you miss it, there's something new happening in the world sphere. And actually it's something very tangible you can do to work with the unknown and the uncertain. And that's how I've experienced it.
Sure, that's really interesting to hear your own experience of it, coming into it, as an experienced leader and leadership development professional, and how it sort of added something to your repertoire. I think the other thing to say is that we've talked quite a bit about individuals working on their own question. We can definitely take an organizational kind of approach to this. And that's why I've done a lot of it over the years, where I've gone in over a number of years with an organization and helped them create the sort of system for identifying the key questions that they would like their people to be working on. And then the kind of the opportunity is to connect the organizational challenge with their individual interests. So if they want to develop their own impact and influence skills, for instance, how can they do that in the context of a real organizational challenge? So as an example, at the on the back of the 2008 global financial crisis, which went on for a few years, we were working with some banks, and they had a lot of people working on questions which related to bad debt, and so they would ask people what they wanted to work on, and a steering group would then look at the suggestions of what people wanted to work on, and they would then notice what the kind of demand was for, and they would also then feed in, looking kind of several years ahead, to what are the questions that might not just be about a crisis, it might be about future opportunities. And I remember at the time, this was kind of looking to the future that we're now in, and they were a number of them were answering questions like, what should we do about the branch networks in banks, in our bank?
Yeah.
Should we continue to have a branch network? And we look now at how branch networks have either been, controversially sort of taken out or transformed or changed. But a lot of that is as a result of, a few years back, working on some questions that we're looking several years ahead and saying, what are the opportunities and things that we need to be thinking about for the future as an organization, and how can we get our people working on this? So our people, our existing leaders, become our research organization.
That's so powerful, like understanding the history of that. So if I were to put that in today's context, I'd say I'd be asking a question if I were in M&S about,
yes,
how does our branch network impact our attack surface in cyber? And how can we use AI on the edge to reduce that risk in service of a more resilient business model? It's so I guess what we're saying, as where we're concluding, is that action learning has a place in strategy.
Yes.
And it has a place in the sky in the future, but it has a place on the ground where people are navigating the day-to-day uncertainty and challenges, and it empowers people to really roll with that and actually take action, no matter how complex.
Yeah,
I think that, everyone can resonate with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a training technique. A lot of people have, over the years, have confused it with being something that you do a training course, then you add on an action learning set at the end. No, you should be working out what your question is at the beginning and working together collaboratively to tackle it. So it's about horses for courses. So you use the right method depending on the nature of the challenge, whether it's a puzzle or whether it's a multifaceted problem or opportunity for the future.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'm conscious of time, Richard. I think we should draw it to a close there because it's Friday evening and it's time to kind of check out. But yeah, just for everyone listening and people who are catching up with this afterwards, look forward to podcasts coming up. We've got some quite exciting new members of our network we're going to bring into the space and have some great conversations with around action learning, leading in crisis, and how we just can get stuff done essentially over the next few weeks. So yeah, please do look out for those, and please feel free to comment, be part of the conversation on our No Can Will Do network. You'll see on LinkedIn there's a presence for No Can Will Do as well. That's very much an open network for you to join, be part of the conversation around action learning in its context today. So yeah, it's been really fun, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Good chat as always. Okay, and we'll speak again soon.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.